Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Is it possible your business is moving too fast? It's an interesting question. Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravett.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And our question today from our listeners, we've been answering listener questions, Mark, you know that. And so our question today is how do you take time to listen and collaborate with your team while you're moving at the speed of a growing organization? I think sometimes we get going so fast, it can be really difficult to listen to our people and collaborate. We talked about listening and collaborating a few days ago. It's spurred this other question from one of our listeners. So can't wait to hear what you got to say about this. Can an organization go too fast, Mark, you think?
I think they're two different questions.
They are.
I think
they
an
are.
organization,
I'm throwing my own question in here.
I think an organization can go too fast. So I think yes, but to me that's an independent question. Maybe we'll spend a few minutes on that. I think it's the collaboration that enables the organization
to go fast,
to go faster.
Yeah, that's good. That's
not
good.
just to go fast. I mean, it's the synergy, it's the problem solving, it's the creativity, it's the innovation, it's the working together that probably got you to your current pace and will enable you to sustain it at least to a point. I mean, there is a point when you outrun your resources, you outrun your leadership. Organizations don't have enough leaders. They're growing too fast.
That's right.
Or actually, they're going to stop growing.
That's right.
Because
it won't outgrow your leadership.
You won't outgrow your leaders. So yeah, you can go too fast.
Yeah. I think the challenge here, as I read this question, is taking. I mean, the word to me is take. How do you take time?
Yeah, you invest time.
You invest time.
It requires leadership.
You're not getting more time. I mean,
leadership, courage, and discipline.
That's exactly right. And you've got to pull back and say we've got to have some time to meet. And let's go back to something we said a few days ago. Meetings are not information sharing opportunity. I mean, oftentimes we'll get in a meeting and, hey, what are you working on? What are you working on? What are you working on? That's fine. But performance management happens in meetings if we get this right. If we can really focus on how do we move the ball down the field in our meetings, meetings can be, we had one leader tell us meetings are where we make our money. It's so much good stuff happens in a meeting. So taking time to make sure you're listening and collaborating, that feels like priority 1A to me. I mean,
investing time,
not
taking time.
That's good.
Yeah, I think even the question
good call out
reveals the mindset and the psyche of the leader.
Right, I don't feel like we have time.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, how in the world could we do this?
Yeah.
I encountered this years ago with a leader who I was grooming to take over facilitation of the team. And I had been leading the meetings and had forewarned him that this was going to be an opportunity that he would have. And so I said, hey, why don't you put together the agenda for the next meeting and let's you and I look at it. I figured I'd rather coach him for success than correct any missteps post-meeting. Let's set him up for a win here. And he brought in the agenda and there was no designated time for building community on the agenda. And I said, hey, I noticed there's no community building time. And he said, yeah, we're too busy. And I said, we're too busy not to build community. Because when it gets busy is when it gets hard. Mm-hmm. And when it gets hard, you need the community.
Yeah.
And so that told me several things. One is that he wasn't ready to take over responsibility for those meetings because at the first sign of the workload accelerating, he wanted to jettison one of our core strategies, which was community.
Yeah. Yeah. I think time here again is a key word in this thing. It's how we manage the time. How do we invest our time
and steward it
and steward our time? Because the reality is for all of us, and I sort of alluded to it, but we all know this. You're not getting any more time. I mean, there's just limits. That's the one thing that is limited. You can get more resources. You can get more team members. You can have more products. You're not getting any more time. And so if you don't have time to invest in these conversations, listening to what your people are thinking, giving them vision,
problem solving,
performance strategy,
management.
on and on and on. It's I've said on here before, if the vision, this is a vision time, and if the vision gets fuzzy to the leader, it's blurry to the people who are following the leader.
Sure.
And so all these things are very important. things that we need to be
Yeah.
doing with our time, how
Well,
we invest that time.
And here's another thing I read into the question, and I'm not trying to slam the man or woman that asked it. I mean, it's a real question.
Yeah.
But it also reveals to me that their meetings aren't adding that much value.
Yeah.
Because if your meetings are adding huge value, you'd cut other stuff before you cut your meeting.
And you like to go to meetings at that point. You're going, this
Oh.
is where we're really moving the
We
ball
used to
down the
love
field.
meetings
Yeah.
because they're the multiplier. That's where you align, where you inspire, where you solve problems, and it's a multiplier.
Yeah.
And it's the most efficient use of a leader's time when you think about, what if I have to do this with individuals or with multiple teams, or I get these leaders together who already work with a bunch of other teams, and it's a turbocharger in and of itself for the leader's time. And
Yeah.
how efficiently and how effectively are you using your time if those meetings are driving performance and they're solving problems?
Yeah.
You got to make them good for this whole thing to work. Crappy meetings, you want to avoid them at all costs.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the world a lot of people have lived in.
Yeah. Well, and go back to even the frontline people. We had a question a few days ago about what are some of those frontline skills that we need. I think how to lead a meeting might be one of the places to start. It's just like, because you're going to be in so many meetings. If you're a
Yeah.
leader, you're going to lead a bunch of meetings. And so how we do that well, I hope your organization is taking time to teach people how to lead a meeting.
Well, if they're not being taught, we can teach you.
yeah, that's exactly right.
In fact, we did a podcast 2 or 3 episodes
we did.
on how to have great meetings.
Yep, that's right.
So look
a
that
couple
up.
of seasons ago.
Yeah, a couple seasons back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All that stuff's there that'll be helpful. But I was just saying, if you don't have time to collaborate, then you really don't have a team. I mean, that goes back to the shared goal stuff that you talked about a few days ago. If the reason you have a team is because you're trying to do something together that you can't do by yourself. And so don't resist the urgency that's coming at you. And it is going to come. I mean, the busyness is going to be there. There's always going to be more emails. There's always going to be more projects, always going to be more stuff. In the midst of all that, you got to find time to meet together, collaborate together, and make sure you're moving the work forward together. If you're doing that, that's really what the emails ought to be about. That's what all the project, all that stuff, it ought to be to help you move the work, not just to be busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The guy who took over Ford a few years ago, help me.
Malali.
Yeah. They were going to lose $13 billion when he took over. That was their projection for the year. And he said, we're going to have a weekly leadership team meeting.
Yeah.
And you may be thinking, how in the world could they afford the time? And he's thinking, how could we afford
How can we not?
We
how
got to
can we
come
afford not
together.
do
We're
it?
losing $13 billion of the year. And he turned it around and he kept the leadership team. That is unheard of. First thing those kind of high-powered CEOs normally do when they
cut
go in,
everything.
they get rid of the leadership team. They think, because these are the men and women that created this mess.
Yeah.
Well, he said, we're going to provide leadership. We're going to work together. And those meetings became the cornerstone of one of the most historic turnarounds in the history of the world.
Pretty amazing, yeah.
Yeah. And you may know this part of the story. He had a leader who told him he was too busy to meet weekly.
I did hear this.
And he basically said, well, I understand that and I want to honor that and we're going to miss you.
Yeah.
He said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're going to have a weekly meeting and my team is going to have a weekly meeting. And if you can't meet with us, you can't be on the team.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so the guy said, okay, I'll come to your meeting.
I'll come to the meeting. Yeah,
But-
I think again, what we invest our time in and what we say is important as
Yeah.
leaders. That's you remember the question a few days ago, like the whole command and control
Mm-hmm.
thing. That's the place where you ought to flex as a leader and say, this is what we're going to do. We can't lose 13 billion.
Right. And here's my
gotta
question
move the
though.
work.
How many of our listeners have a greater problem than losing $13 billion over the
not-
balance
probably
of the
not a
year?
lot of them.
Not many of you. And he could call a meeting
Yeah.
and said, we're going to use this as our forum to save this organization.
Yeah.
Not just to save it, but to help it thrive.
Yeah, I love that. I would just say to you, if you're listening today and you don't feel like your people are aligned, you've not been listening and collaborating because you've not been taking the time, you get to decide how you use your time. I want to encourage you today, schedule a meeting, schedule a conference, schedule a retreat, whatever you need to do. Get everybody in the same room and work on the work. It's really important. Information sharing is great, but performance management is so much greater. Learn how to have great meetings and your organization will be headed to a better place. All right, remember, the best leaders lead every day.